forget to do. I seem to always forget to hit that record button. So we are recording tonight. Most everybody, I think, that has signed up with this event is familiar with Warwick's. You came through the Warwick site to come to this event, but let me just tell you a little bit about Warwick's and who we are. So this year, Warwick's is actually celebrating its 125th anniversary. So, and we're here celebrating women, and Nancy Warwick is the 4th generation owner of the store. She still comes in every day. She's younger than me, which is which I love. That it's like, because people think, oh, 125 years old, she must be old. It's like, no, she's young. Well, I'm not young, but she's young. So anyway, so we've got a big celebration that will be happening at the end of the year, like around November, because we think that maybe by that time that, restrictions will be lifted and we can celebrate. So look for something from that from us. Most of you purchased a book for this event tonight. So those, I'm gonna send you an email through Eventbrite to kind of let you know if you're picking it up or if we're shipping it, because I want to make sure that you get the book plates and everything. So look out for an email from me probably tonight, if not first thing tomorrow morning, on what the status of the books are. So the last time we hosted Chelsea was it 2 years ago that we had you at San Diego?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. How old's your baby? Because you were.
Well, so we have 3 kids, our
right.
6-year-old, our 4-year-old, and our 20-month-old.
So it was 20 months ago. Well, a little more than 20 months ago.
Yes, yeah, I think that, yes, it is funny how time gets demarcated when you're a parent. It's sort of like, how many kids did I have? Was I pregnant?
Where was I when that happened?
I know.
Yeah. So you were, I think, pregnant with your youngest.
I was pregnant with the 3rd. Yes,
yep.
With Jeff.
Yep, when you were here. And we had this great auditorium filled with all kinds of kids. And one of the things that I loved about that was the kids' questions. And so tonight, if you scroll over your screen, you're going to see the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. So kids and parents, but kids, if you've got questions, if you need help with your parents typing in a question there, Dr. Flammer is going to be conducting the conversation tonight, and she's going to bring those in after we chat with Chelsea and Atia for a few minutes. So put your questions in there, though, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. We might not be able to get to all of them, but we will do our best to get to as many as we can. So with that, I think we've given everybody enough time to settle in. Another thing, Chelsea, that reminded me of your birthday was last month, and your mom posted this best picture of you and her with your arms out like this. And all I could think of was foreshadowing she persisted. And so we're here tonight to celebrate one of those that persisted, a San Diegan Sally Ride. And so we are so excited for this event. I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Flammer, and she will then start the conversation. So Dr. Karen Flammer is the Director of Digital Learning at UC San Diego. Dr. Flammer has successfully directed and managed large-scale programs, developed complex online learning programs, applied research, and I know I'm going to mess up this word, pedagogical. Is that how you say it?
Pedagogical.
Pedagogical. I was like, oh my God, I should have Googled it. Strategies to program development, worked collaboratively with diverse audiences, and successfully authored million-dollar grants. Dr. Flammer received her PhD in physics at UC San Diego and has over 20 years of professional experience as a research physicist and lecturer in UC San Diego's Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering, and as a senior director of large-scale education and professional programs offered by 2 centers at UC San Diego. Dr. Flammer is also co-founder and former senior vice president of Sally Ride Science, a STEM education technology company dedicated to inspiring young people in STEM and to promoting STEM literacy. With that, ladies, have a great conversation. I will see you at the end.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you, Julie. It is such an honor and a privilege to be here to celebrate the launch of She Persisted, Sally Ride. What a great way to also pay tribute to Women's History Month. And this is also the 20th year anniversary of Sally Ride Science. But before we start this conversation, I want to introduce our authors. Many of you know them, but Chelsea Clinton is the author of the New York Times best-selling picture book, She Persisted, 13 American Women Who Changed the World, which is praised as a lovely, moving work of children's literature and a polished introduction to a diverse and accomplished group of women. In addition to the book, she has co-written with her mother, excuse me, Hillary Clinton. She's the author of bestsellers, Don't Let Them Disappear, Start Now, You Can Make a Difference, She Persisted Around the World, 13 Women Who Changed History, and other inspiring titles. Chelsea is the vice chair of the Clinton Foundation, where she works on many initiatives, including those that help to empower our next generation of leaders. Atia Awabi is an award-winning journalist, foreign news correspondent, and author. She spent 10 years living and working in Afghanistan and then the Middle East. She was born to Afghan parents in West Germany and was raised in the United States. She is the critically acclaimed author of The Secret Sky and A Land of Permanent Goodbyes, and the author of this book, She Persisted, Sally Ride. So welcome and congratulations to both of you. Chelsea, let's talk a little bit about this book series. This is a new chapter book series. I believe the first book in the series launched in January of this year, and one book is coming out each month. I know that this book series was inspired by your earlier She Persisted picture books, but what motivated you to create these chapter books for a little bit older audience of young readers?
Well, Karen, thank you so much for the question, and thank you for doing this with us, especially since I know this is very much still like in your work day, where it's kind of the end of my day here in New York City, and hopefully my children are going to sleep. Hopefully my husband is stewarding that well, but if you hear kind of any screams in the background, you'll know it's just because there's probably a very heated argument actually about what should be the bedtime stories, because somehow that is hotly contested every night. But I will say, Atia, that Charlotte, my 6-year-old, just finished reading Sally Ride, and she loved it. And that's really why I wanted to create chapter books, because I wanted, readers who had first met, or maybe they had heard of kind of the women in She Persisted, but really were able to learn more about them through the picture book when they were younger. I really wanted to kind of answer the curiosity that admittedly I heard from my own daughter, and that I was hearing from young readers, and sometimes admittedly their parents or grandparents, to learn more about the extraordinary women who are in the She Persisted books, not just the first book, but kind of in the subsequent books. And I'm so thankful that my wonderful editor at Flammer, Jill Santopolo, kind of had similarly been thinking, I wonder if we could extend or expand the She Persisted picture book into chapter books for young, although slightly older readers. And so I'm so thankful to have had the chance to do this work with our amazing group of authors. We've dubbed ourselves the Persisterhood, including Atia, who I think just did such a wonderful job of sharing Sally's story in a way that felt both accessible, certainly for my daughter, and still incredibly inspiring. You do have to work hard to do great things. And yet if you do work hard, you can do great things. So it's been so fun for me to see that, not only as an author and as someone who cares so deeply about these women and their stories, but also as a mom. So that's kind of why I'd hoped to do this, and why it's been just such a joy to now kind of have these books out in the world, with more coming every month.
And it's such a wide range of women that are in these series. They're all trailblazers, and they've overcome barriers. So how did you select the women for the She Persisted series?
So the first She Persisted book was just incredibly personal, candidly. It's women who truly, have inspired me at different points in my life. I remember being a little girl and watching Sally Ride talk about going to space. I also remember being a little girl and watching Flo like obliterate the world record, the 1988 Seoul Olympics, and just to kind of so visibly see and then kind of hear these women talk about their experiences of truly like proving, what was possible, just had such a profound impact on me as a little kid. And then, flash forward to the women's story that I learned most recently, who's in the first She Persisted book, which is the story, coming out next month of Dr. Virginia Apgar. I didn't know about Dr. Apgar, and I have a master's in public health. I teach at the Mailman School of Public Health at Columbia University. Dr. Apgar worked at Columbia University, and I had never encountered her work or known her story until I became pregnant with my first child. And my terrific OBGYN was explaining what would happen, like after hopefully like a safe and healthy delivery. And she started talking about the Apgar score. And I just couldn't believe that I somehow, like, in all of my experience as a student, as a researcher, as a teacher, that I just hadn't come across this woman who kind of created, arguably the most common test in all of human history, right? A test that has been administered to literally billions and billions of newborn babies around the world. And so I just became like fascinated by her and by her story, and really her story of also just extraordinary persistence. So, Karen, the women just all kind of came into my life at different points in time, and all just have been so inspirational to me. And I hope that through the picture books, and now even more kind of with the chapter books, that more young readers will know why they're so inspiring to me. And I hope that they can then be inspiring to them.
Yeah, and you're also inspiring learning about history, because I always think about how sometimes history books are dry if they're factual, but you've brought so much to life, and I think that it's going to have a huge impact on what young readers remember and take away. I see these books being used by parents, with their children, and with teachers in schools. And as really a starting point for conversations. And I'm just wondering, when you were envisioning these, what types of conversations did you hope that children would have with their parents or teachers?
Well, Karen, I think partly, stories about history, and maybe why, they weren't reading these women's stories in their history books, candidly. So not only kind of what these stories themselves were teaching them, but also kind of maybe what their absence in their history books also could teach them about kind of whose stories historically have been valued in our country. I think so much about Claudette Golvin, who was featured in kind of already one of the chapter books that's out in the world, and is someone that I learned about when I was a kid in Little Rock, Arkansas, from one of my social studies teachers, who thought it was really important that as kids we were taught about other kids who had really helped change history. And yet, if you kind of open most American history textbooks, you'll learn about Rosa Parks, as you should, and you won't probably learn about Claudette Golvin. Actually, 9 months before Rosa Parks courageously kept her seat, Claudette made the same choice, where she refused to give up her seat on a bus to a white woman who came on and demanded that she do so. And she was arrested. And, this 15-year-old girl just took this just extraordinary stance. And as she would say, she felt like, she had Sojourner Truth on one shoulder and Harriet Tubman on the other. So kind of, she was very aware of her, what she felt like was her responsibility to history and to the future. And it's actually, her name that's included in the lawsuit, Browder v. Gale, which is when the Supreme Court ruled that segregation, not only in Alabama, but on public transportation systems, was illegal. And it's just still mind-boggling to me that we don't learn about Claudette's story and all that she sacrificed through her persistence to fight the charges against her that really did help change the course of American history. So, I hope there's so many conversations, Karen, that occur. And I also hope, really critically, that young readers think about what they can do, already as kids to help make a difference. And it's something I'm so thankful, all of the 13 authors weren't just kind of open to, but were really like enthusiastic about, or how we end the books, which are like, if you're inspired by this woman's stories, like here's some way that you can persist too. So I hope that especially helps spark stories.
And I'm sure it will. I don't want you to give anything away, but what's the future of this series? I mean, where do you see, I think there'll be a book released every month this year, correct? What next then? What next? Because you can't stop with just this.
Well, thankfully, I think because the reception has been so positive, and really just in such recognition of kind of our amazing authors throughout the series, I am fairly confident that we'll have the chance for more chapter books in the future. And also I'm really excited that we'll have more picture books too. And I just hope that we can continue to share the stories of persistent women. I think it's so important. I feel that way not only just as a human being and as a mom of a daughter. I also feel that way as a mom of a son, 2 sons. And I see in my 4.5-year-old, because I said he was 4 earlier, and he said, Mom, I'm 4.5. With my 4.5-year-old, that he doesn't think it's unique or something that he has to try to do to have women role models. Like Wonder Woman, like for a while, has been admittedly displaced by Iron Man at the moment. But like Wonder Woman for a while was like his favorite superhero. She displaced Batman, who I think displaced Black Panther, who like, it's just sort of like it's just like Wonder Woman just kind of been, he's like also increasingly interested in Captain Marvel, who's like another woman superhero. So we always say, I'm hopeful that she's going to displace Iron Man. So, whether we're talking about like, in the fictional world or very much, in the real world, if you ask him, who he really looks up to in the real world, he'll say Katherine Johnson, because we have this book, Counting on Katherine, and it recounts, how hard she worked and how important her hard work was to NASA.
Right.
She also features in one of the little mini biographies we have of Neil Armstrong, and he's just in awe of the fact that she helped send people to space. He also thinks it's really cool she skipped 3 grades. So, he doesn't think it's like anything but natural for him to have women that he looks up to, whether in the superhero realm or very much, in history.
I love hearing that, but the saying, you can't be what you can't see, is so important, especially I think for young girls. I mean, for young boys too, to know that there's no reason women can't achieve the same and have the same careers that men historically have. And that's why I think that, role models are just increasingly important for both boys and girls. So Atia, I love how you captured Sally's life in this book. I'm just curious, what drew you to want to tell her story and write about her?
Well, what really drew me to Sally is, as a child, I was into science. I dreamt of being an astronaut. I had many dreams as a child, and I do remember dreaming to go out in space, but also then being told, hey, science, maybe you should go more in this direction. Maybe science isn't your thing. It's not something that you're going to excel at. So I believed people. And Sally didn't believe them. Sally worked hard. She persisted. She made sure that she continued to do what people were telling her was a man's choice of study. They said science was for men. And luckily, she decided that she didn't care. She loved it, and she wanted to continue to study science. And it's fascinating to me to know that, we see all these women in science now. We see all these female astronauts, but really, as you mentioned, you can't be what you can't see. And that's something that Sally used to say as well. And she didn't have that. She didn't see that. She didn't see a female astronaut, but she became that for other females who wanted to go to space.
Yes, thank goodness she did. So, I knew Sally for almost 20 years, and I know that she was a very private person. And bits and pieces of her life would come out in conversations or the talks that she gave, particularly when she gave talks to, inspire young people. So you must have done a tremendous amount of research, because there's so many things in that book that I read and I was like, I don't think I ever heard that. So, I mean, how did you go about finding everything about her life? I mean, everything about the teachers, her experience at Westlake and her school and on up, that I think are so valuable for people to know, that her life wasn't one just straight path. It was a kind of an interesting trajectory.
Absolutely. And I think that we can all say that we've had interesting paths. I think Chelsea, she was also a journalist. So I approached this as a journalist myself too, because what I want to do when I write a book, even with my other novels, which are technically fiction, I call it realistic fiction because it involves a lot of research. And my first approach is to speak to the subjects that I am going to write about. And unfortunately, I could not do that with Sally because she passed away too soon, 9 years ago now. And so I thought the next best thing was to reach out to her life partner. So I reached out to Tam O'Shaughnessy, who was very open to talking with me, and we chatted virtually. She gave me a glimpse into her life with Sally and what Sally's life was like. Also, I read an incredible book by Lynn Shear Lynn did tremendous research. Lynn spoke to Sally's family, Sally's friends, Sally's coworkers, Sally's former classmates. And I really felt I was in Sally's life growing up with her as I was reading that book. So that helped out a lot. And honestly, the thing that was the most important to me, though, was Sally's own voice. And luckily, you go on the internet, there are interviews with Sally, there are videos of Sally, and it's just nice to hear her words from her own voice as well.
Yeah, and I really liked how you described her interaction with her high school science teacher, I think had a significant role, in her choosing, a science career, as opposed to, I guess she also had, you talked about an English teacher that, told her she had a sciencey brain or something.
A mind wasted in science.
Exactly. But so, and both of you have, young children. I mean, what's the role here that you think that teachers can play, say, in using these books, to help have these conversations with their students about all the possibilities really that do lie before them, and that things don't always just come easy or just come lay in their lap.
Well, so what was interesting about Sally, tying your question into Sally's life, is the fact that, everyone just assumes that she was a fantastic student, a model student, and she was very smart, don't get me wrong, and she got good grades. But she was not the best student. And I say that in the sense of you really needed to capture her attention. If you wanted to motivate her, you had to capture her attention. And Dr. Momartz, that human physiology teacher that you were talking about, did that. So Sally would come to school and bring brain teasers and try to see if her teacher could figure it out. And she'd be fascinated by the way that she would figure it out. And it taught Sally to be curious, to ask questions. But then she also had teachers like that English teacher who told her that her life was wasted in science, but it was really because that teacher was not motivating her enough. Sally studied for a test on the ride to school. She wasn't one to prepare for a week in advance. And I think a lot of us can connect with that. And I love other students knowing that too, and children knowing that, because you don't have to be the best student to continue to follow your dreams. You just have to have that passion. And when you have that passion, that knowledge comes with it. I feel like with teachers, as Chelsea put it so eloquently, is that these books, and I have to just praise Chelsea for creating this series. I think it's just amazing. I feel like this is something that I certainly didn't have growing up. And I'm so grateful that my children have it, especially my son, who is just like Chelsea's son, it's no surprise to him that a woman can be a scientist. It's no surprise to him now that a woman can be an astronaut. His favorite science show was on Netflix, and it was a pregnant woman doing science experiments. That's totally normal to him, and that's amazing. And I think that with these books, I feel like teachers can open doors to students in a way that those doors felt shut for a lot of us. Whether you be a female, whether you be a person of color, whether you be a person and who feels like they have to hide a part of themselves. These books are a way to show you that, you can do it too. They did it, they persisted. And if you continue to persist, you can do it as well.
Yes. Wow. Thank you. I like to, you talked about how Sally, we should talk about the sports. I mean, it was so interesting that she, dropped out of college, to try to play professional tennis. I mean, she gave it a shot. That was another persisted passion, right? And then she ended up going back to science. But I remember something you said in the book that I had not heard before, that she didn't like when she was growing up being called a tomboy.
Mm-hmm.
And why was that?
It's because if you're called a tomboy, she said, that's implying that a girl can't do it herself. So you're implying that if a girl loves to play sports, it's because a girl shouldn't be doing it, a boy should be doing it. So it's funny because I used to be called a tomboy growing up, and I used to tell people, yeah, I was considered a tomboy growing up. Now I catch myself before I say that after doing my research on Sally and hearing and reading that quote from her, because like, you know what? I wasn't a tomboy. I was a girl who loved to play outside and get dirty and play sports. And that's totally fine. A girl can do that. And you mentioned tennis. And what's fascinating, a fact about Sally that I didn't know, was that she was so good at tennis, that she could have played professional tennis. Even Billie Jean King said that she could have made it to the pros. And she tried. She dropped out of college at Swarthmore, came back to the West Coast, focused on tennis day and night. And then she realized, you know what? I don't like playing tennis day and night. I don't like eating, breathing tennis. And she decided to go back to science. And she said, this is my passion. I love this. So she went to Stanford. She got her undergraduate, she got her graduate, and she got her PhD there. At the same time, she played tennis recreationally. And it was at Stanford where she saw that newspaper article saying that NASA was finally looking to recruit female astronauts.
Have any of either of your children said that they would like to go to space one day?
Oh my gosh. My son, Aiden, my 4.5-year-old, is obsessed with space. So yes, if you were to ask him right now what he wanted to be when he grew up, he would say an astronaut and a scientist. But some days it's a mathematician. He does love numbers, and kind of everything that they can enable and unlock and empower. So,
in a few minutes, we're gonna move over and take questions from our audience. But I guess I'd like to ask each of you, what out of Sally's life story inspires you the most? I mean, what most resonated, with you? Because she persisted in so many different ways.
I can go first and say that honestly, that dreams can change, and that's okay. She dreamt of being a tennis player, and then she decided, you know what, I don't love this anymore. Not the way that I feel like you should to become a professional tennis player. And then she decided to go back to her love of science. I feel like sometimes when we tell kids to follow their dreams, they have to focus on just that one dream. And if they decide to change their minds, they get scared too. And then they stick to something that they might not have a passion for anymore. My dream, I had many dreams as a child, but one was to be a journalist, and I achieved that dream and I loved it. And, maybe I will love it again in the future, but my dream then changed to become a mother. And that sounds like you're giving up on your dreams, but it was just another dream that I always had. And then another dream was to write books, and I got to do that. So it made me feel like it's okay. And it's okay to teach my children that, just work hard, keep persisting. And if you don't love it, it's not something that you should continue to do.
And I would completely echo everything Atia just said. I would also say, Karen, that you have to be open to possibility, right? I mean, I just think it may sound so kind of incongruous or unimaginable to, kids who are listening to us today that, Sally saw in the Stanford newspaper the ad from NASA. And, given like she was, studying physics and kind of the work that, like the research work she was already a part of, and also the conversation she was already a part of, I think it's probably pretty likely that she would have heard that NASA was opening its astronaut training program, but it may have taken longer. She may not have applied for that first class. And so I think, to Atia's point, like, being comfortable with your dream shifting, because certainly like my dreams also have shifted over time. And I thought I was going to be a doctor when I was a little girl. And then I realized I was more interested in public health than I was in medicine and in kind of everything that helps us either kind of have a chance to be healthy or to get healthier or to get well if we're sick, kind of beyond just what may happen in an exam room or kind of in an individual doctor and patient relationship. Even this work of helping to kind of share and amplify stories of women who inspire me, I think very much is in the service of public health, because certainly I think it's contra to public health if, we're telling little girls to shrink themselves or shrink their imaginations or their dreams or their identities. So, for me, it is absolutely what Atia said of kind of allowing ourselves to kind of think about how we live our purpose in life, and how that can change over time as our dreams change, and also to be open to new possibilities kind of while that's happening, or to facilitate that happening. Because I mean, maybe because I went to Stanford and I remember reading like the Stanford Daily, like still when it was a newspaper, back when we read newspapers, like, in form and like not on, on our screens. So I think about that moment a lot too.
Thank you. I'm going to now switch over and open it up, and I'm going to read some questions that are coming in live from our audience. Chelsea, this is a question from you, from an anonymous attendee. Hi, I am Zarita, and I am 7 years old. I would like to ask Chelsea, what motivated her to write She Persisted, and what inspired her the most when she was young like me?
Oh, well, Zarita, when I was 7, start with the second part of your question. I really, I loved science and I loved sports, and I loved medicine. So I loved my pediatrician so much. So my pediatrician inspired me. Sally Ride definitely inspired me. And although I was 8 during the Seoul Olympics when FloJo ran, as I talked about earlier, it's hard for me to even put into words what it meant to me as this like little girl in Little Rock, Arkansas, watching on our like old fashioned TV. You don't even know what that means, Zarita, but it was kind of this like clunky old fashioned TV that you admittedly probably had to get way too close to the screen to be able to see because it was sort of fuzzy. And I remember so vividly watching FloJo win in the 100 and the 200 meters, and to win with just so much joy and pride, and to see a woman so unapologetic about her victory. I don't think I'd ever seen that in my life before. So it was hugely inspiring to me to think, oh, like we can do that. Like we can win with joy and with pride. Like we don't have to hide that. So along with my mom and my grandmothers, who were all really important and still remain important to me, even though my grandmothers are no longer with us, Probably the honest answers are my pediatrician, Sally Ride, and Flojo when I was your age, or just about your age. And to the first part of your story, or sorry, excuse me, the first part of your question, She Persisted, the first picture book really emerged from sort of two things coming together. One was that I, at the time, was a new mom to two kids. So my daughter, Charlotte, was 2, and my son, Aiden, was only a few months old when I first started to really think about doing this, because I realized how many of the kids' books that we read, absent like some favorites like The Paperback Princess, were centered on little boys, or where even the animals were male characters. Like, I don't know why we have felt over so many years the need to kind of assign a gender to a frog or a cow or a horse. And yet so many of the books kind of were like a little boy frog or a kind of male bear. And I just kept thinking, like, this is not okay. Like, clearly I need to do a better job as the curator of our little family library at the library, literally, and at our like local bookstores. Like, shout out to Books of Wonder, which is our favorite kids bookstore here in New York City. And also I was like, wow, I should be part of the solution to this. Like, I should share stories of women, like told from a woman's perspective, that I think are really important. And also the experience of just watching Senator Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts be so disrespected by her male colleagues, and effectively told to be silenced, Zarita, and then officially silenced by her male colleagues when she was trying to read a letter that the great Coretta Scott King had written many years before, kind of into the Senate record. And so I just thought, oh my gosh, like, we're still treating women as if like our voices aren't as valuable and don't deserve to be as heard, like including like extraordinary women, Senator Elizabeth Warren and the great civil rights leader, Coretta Scott King, who was an important civil rights leader in her own right. And gosh, I'm like sitting here as a parent, and we don't have enough books like about girls and women, like told by girls and women. And so just all that came together, and I thought, oh, like I want to be doing something about this. So I should do something about this. And thankfully, my wonderful editor, who I mentioned earlier, I think was also kind of thinking across like the picture books that she'd been part of, and how so many of them were like so wonderful and yet still like centered on boys. And so we came together and decided to work on the first book, and the just amazingly talented Alexandra Boyer, thankfully, was interested in working with us, and she provided the just extraordinary illustrations that I think so capture the spirits of all the women, not only in the first book, but in the subsequent book. So lots of things came together kind of as what I was feeling as an American citizen and as a human being, and also as a mom.
Thank you. So next question is from Sonia Teetermore. Watching with my 13-year-old Kai, who would like to know, what was the coolest or most surprising thing you found out about Sally in your research? So Atia, let's see if you can answer that. The coolest or the most exciting thing?
So I think one of the coolest things as a kid, and I know I would have loved to do this if we had the opportunity, and not many children do, is that Sally's parents at the age of 9 got permission from their high school principal to take Sally out of school for 1 whole year, Sally and her sister, who is a couple years younger, and they took them out of school for a year, and they shipped their family station wagon to Europe, and they traveled from country to country throughout Europe, just exploring the land, exploring the different cultures. And it was even on that trip in Spain where Sally's mother introduced her to tennis on the clay courts of Spain. So that was I thought the coolest, besides the whole, space aspect of it all. Another cool fact about space, because I know a lot of people would be interested in that when they're interested in Sally, was that when Sally was in space, she was doing her work. It was, just checking off things on the checklist. But at times when she could just take a breath and look outside, she would look at the earth and just see the horizon and just see just this little thin layer that surrounded Earth, and that was the ozone layer. And she just saw how fragile our Earth is, our planet is. And as the years went on in NASA later, when she had to write the ride report, as they call it, and that was just a report and trying to figure out the future of NASA, what NASA should do. She mentioned, having a lunar base, exploring Mars, exploring the solar system robotically first before sending astronauts. But she also said it's time to explore our own planet, trying to figure out how we can protect our planet, to understand our planet, because there's so much on our little ball here that we don't know about. And as much as it's amazing and fantastic and really necessary to explore space, we should explore our own planet as well.
Yeah, and she, until the end of her life, that was such a passion. I mean, kind of weaving in the importance of being an activist about, helping this changing world and this planet that isn't going to be around forever if we keep proceeding like we're proceeding.
You knew her really well. So what is an interesting fact that you would share?
She was a fierce competitor. So I remember once Tam and I and Sally decided to do something fun, and we went bowling. And, all of us were like, oh, we haven't bowled in a long time, and this is just going to be fun. Oh my goodness. Sally was like, playing her normal cool, right? Like never showing, any kind of stress or anything. She was just going to, kept checking the score, was going to make sure that she was going to win this bowling game. And again, she applied herself, as you mentioned, to what she was passionate about. I mean, that's human nature, but that's also so important for people to know. I mean, she, we would see her sometimes like not wanting to do something because she didn't think it was important. But if she thought something was relevant and important, you could not stop her. I mean, it was a perseverance really that I had never seen before. So it was, and that's something I think I'll never forget. And I remember myself all the time is just thinking, what would Sally do? And there's a question now that also is in that both of you should answer, from Francis French. If Sally was here with us in this decade, what do you think she'd be doing to inspire kids now in this ever-changing world?
Oh, wow, Karen. I mean, that's another question I'd love to hear your I think, she did so much to support kids and young people to not only kind of understand kind of what science is, but also to understand kind of what science can help you discover. And I think, her work kind of through the programs she built, whether kind of at a university level or for much younger kids, was so much about, I think, helping young girls and young women, as well as, students who are boys or men, but especially young girls or women, I think, to really feel comfortable in our curiosity and to feel empowered in our curiosity. And so when I think about that question, rooted in today, I certainly think she would be, right there kind of in the dialogue around kind of what NASA, should or shouldn't be doing in terms of kind of space exploration that will be directed by NASA, and where NASA will be a collaborating partner, whether or not NASA really should be kind of pausing or abandoning kind of efforts to develop kind of whatever the next generation of kind of, shuttle and rockets would be. I think, she would support all the work that she's done and continue to nurture that kind of and embed whatever it is that we've learned, in the last decade kind of into her work. And also I think she would rightly very much claim her place in these big debates that are happening at NASA. And I also like to think that over the last year, where there's been such a discounting and a derision towards scientists and the importance of really listening to scientists, kind of as we make major decisions that affect, public health and people's health. I like to think that she also would have been bolstering those who were really arguing, fighting for sometimes, and sometimes especially the women who had to fight so hard at the federal, state, and local levels to make the case for why their expertise really mattered and why elected officials should be listening to them as they were kind of making decisions about how to navigate the COVID-19 crisis.
I completely agree with everything Chelsea just said. Dr. Flammer, you mentioned that Sally was a private person as well. She didn't, I guess, she didn't cause controversy. She was private. She loved science. She loved having other people explore science, teaching young children. But as Chelsea mentioned, I would hope that, in the last, a lot has changed since Sally passed away. And I do hope that if she was still around, she would have spoken up on these issues. And maybe you can touch on whether you think she would have, because we talk about science and science really being put down by our last administration. And, also when you look at space, Sally mentioned in the RIDE report that space should never be weaponized. It is something that it should not be. There shouldn't be a space race anymore. It should not be weaponized. It makes it more dangerous to explore. It makes it more dangerous for all of us in the end. It makes it dangerous for our planet. And she was vocal about that. So I do wonder what she would have said in the last few years. But maybe you could also touch on that since you knew her so well.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything both of you said is true. And I think now of yes, the non-attention and appreciation for science is something that, she was private and she did not like to be the center of attention. And yet she also did not stand for incorrect facts and incorrect data. So I do think she would have used a lot of the opportunities that have come up in the last many months to purely state, be a strong voice for the facts. And in the way that she would do it, it wasn't with emotion. It was, with this is what the data shows and the science shows. I also think with so much attention needed right now on all the social justice and equity issues, I think Sally would have, that are more prominent now than they were when she died. I think Sally would find, again, a level-headed, science-based somehow voice in those issues, because she was a very strong proponent of equity across everything. I mean, across science, definitely, which is why we started Sally Ride Science, but it was really important to her. So that's a good question. And we won't ever know. Do we have time for one more, Julie? Or...
I think we do. Do you have time for one more question here? The one about what the last question there?
Yeah. Okay. So Chelsea, thank you for Chelsea and Atia, thank you for creating a book about Sally Ride. Any plans to cover any other women in space?
Well, I have written about Mae Jemison in other contexts, who also was a major inspiration to me. And I am convinced one of the reasons I went to Stanford, even though I knew I was not going to be a physicist, was because of the connection to both Sally and Mae Jemison. So I have been lucky enough to share her story already in the book of Gutsy Women, which I wrote with my mom. And yes, I do write about another astronaut in an upcoming She Persisted book.
Well, maybe that's our spoiler alert for.
There we go. That's a great thing to close on.
And Atia, I'm sure you would love to do your very in-depth research on another space hero.
I am so proud to be a part of this persisterhood. I would be up for it 100%. And I'm excited to read Chelsea. So I'm excited for that spoiler too.
Yeah, we had one of the watchers was saying that she loved the persisterhood. She loved that that moniker was fantastic. And there was another person that said that they loved that you kept saying she persisted because it's giving her the motivation to keep doing her own thing in her own book. So we keep going. Atia, when you mentioned Lynn Scher, one of the watchers too was talking about when actually Sally came to Warwick's and signed her book. You know, she had signings at Warwick's, and you know, Lynn was there. So it just is so wonderful that Sally is still just, you know, we just keeping her in everybody's front of mind is just fantastic. So thank you, Chelsea, for that. And thank you, Atia, and Karen. Thank you too. And the She Persisted series, we just can't wait for all the rest of them that come out. So thank you, everybody who joined us tonight, and to Penguin Young Readers for allowing us to do this. So with that, good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Once we close, we all kind of go away. So goodbye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.